Nadine sometimes tells me that this fascination with family history is specifically Australian. Is it? Yes. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder if this is more evidence of this schism, this migratory split. We walk around the hills and the vineyards near the village where she grew up in Germany. And she tells me, here people know where they fit in. There's no need to search all the time. She points down the hill and says, I know every second person in the cemetery over there. I know all the family of my friends, their aunts, cousins, grandparents. It goes back a long time. Everyone knows your birthday and your private business. I laugh at that. I'm not so sure that I'd cope. I'm a big city boy. She says, yeah, that's true, but the community is so safe because of this tight network. Now that I live in Tasmania, all of this specific cultural community knowledge is completely useless. It's all in my head. Street names from a village on the other side of the world. I think about that for a bit. And I say to her, perhaps all your descendants in Australia will be searching for these very same street names. I've been thinking that it's a really human thing to do. All of this story weaving in the landscape. We arrive in the new world, still connected to the old one. Now these connections, they keep us alive, so we've got to set about creating new stories so that we can make sense of this new place. My great-grandfather travelled to Melbourne in 1892. Here he worked selling for flowers and fruit until he could send for Giuseppe and their 2 children, 8-year-old Maria and 5-year-old Antonio. At this time, only 1,000 Aeolians lived in Australia. Most of them lived in Carlton, just north of the city of Melbourne. Bouverie Street. Just this name alone conjures up in my mind a mythology, a historical hovel filled with Italians living on top of one another in the terraced housing of the inner north. Young Antonio was put to work. At 6 years of age, he sold papers outside of Flinders Street Station. He went from door to door, selling flowers, violets. The Santospirito family were very hard workers and began to do well. In 1902, there's this story that some fellow hit my great-grandfather. Now, was it a fight? Was it a joke? I mean, who knows? But around that time was when the headaches started. Now, Australian doctors, they don't really know what they're doing. So Antonino went to consult with some proper doctors back in Italy. In his absence, it turned out that young Antonio had an enormous capacity for work. 3 a.m. starts to buy stock at Queen Victoria markets, and in summer he would even haul his dad's barrow to St Kilda, do a full day's work, and then haul it all the way back. Gosh, that's about 15 or 17 kilometres or something. In 1903, his father returned. Did they cure the headaches? No. During the voyage, he had kindly taken another young child under his wing. Stories like this boy's, Salvatore Russo, those stories boggle my mind. A 9-year-old crossing the planet with no family. When he was much older, he remembered my great-grandfather's kindness. He said when he was alone on the boat, Antonino helped him, and when he arrived, he went to stay with the Santospiritos. Now, when I was 9, I was like eating Anzac cookies and watching the midday movie on Channel 7. I remember one of these movies. It was a science fiction movie. It was set in Melbourne in 1964. It was called On the Beach. It was the end of the world. It was a bleak film. Everyone in it was grieving. Fred Astaire's character decides to win the Australian Grand Prix. I mean, why not? We're all going to die. I liked Gregory Peck as the lead. This particular film dealt with how people chose to end their lives. The race was very exciting. I wouldn't have picked Fred Astaire as the world's final Grand Prix winner of all time, but not many of the other cars completed the race. Fred chooses his ending in a garage, in the winning vehicle. At the end of the film, the Melbourne city streets are completely empty. I remember wondering if all the memories die when we're all gone. A few years ago, Dad and I visited the place where Antonino passed away. It was this huge building built in the 1870s. Dad told me that in 1904, Antonino was brought there after his headaches became too hard for his family to handle. Humongous institutions like this one are like citadels, dense with history. Antonino died on the 16th of June, 1905, of a brain tumour. 13-year-old Antonio had already been the breadwinner for a number of years. I can't begin to comprehend his life, working so hard, so young. By age 14, he had 3 men working for him. Can you imagine that? Today, he was a frugal businessman, and his wealth grew slowly at first, and then quickly. He was very family conscious and only employed Italians. He later married Lena Vagona. I heard a lot about her in my childhood. She was la mamma degli Italiani. She and Antonio had 3 children, Maria, Jared, and that's my dad on the left there, Anthony, in the cute oversized jacket. This photo sits on my mantelpiece in Hobart. I look at it sometimes and imagine how Antonio must have put these fine young scamps to work. He built up wholesale interstate networks throughout Victoria, Tasmania, Brisbane, and New South Wales, and in winter months he focused on other networks. In Melbourne, his main location was known as The Stand, in the laneway between Young and Jackson's and the long-since-gone Port Phillip Club Hotel. Out the back was used for packing banana crates with flowers, and they'd wheel the cases to the station, or to Ansett, or to TAA to be freighted. In Victoria, the legally enforced closing time of liquor-licensed venues was 6 p.m, resulting in a rush on the bars after work, known as the 6 o'clock swill. An entrepreneurial florist would strategically position his workers and children on certain street corners laden with flowers as workers spewed out of the pubs, thronging toward the station to return home to their wives. There's a photo floating around of a proud Antonio at the stand. He had become the king of flowers on Flinders Street. In 1954, he suffered heart disease and retired. And in 1959, a month before he died, Antonio's first grandchild, Simon, was born. A friend of the family's, Dolly Sloan, said that in a rare show of feelings, he told her that he was overcome with emotion and wonder. (1959) was the same year that they filmed On the Beach in Melbourne. You know, the film that I was telling you about before, with Gregory Peck and Fred Astaire. It was 1964, the future! The Cold War that had split Berlin had become so hot that the Northern Hemisphere had destroyed itself. It was the end. Nuclear fallout is moving southwards. The Australian government dispenses suicide pills to its citizens. Cities are littered with the legends of people who came before. Can you hear them? It seems even clearer to me now that everyone's gone. My Uncle David, Maria's husband, said that they filmed one of the shots of empty Melbourne streets from the upstairs window of Young and Jackson's. His brother Dante Triaca ran a restaurant up there in the 60s. I watched the movie again, but I couldn't quite spot that shot. A few years ago, someone placed a gate across the laneway where the stand once stood. One day it might become a shop. More stories, memories, histories, all slowly compressing down on top of one another. Eventually, all of us become part of the concrete.